Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilov, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. As a card-carrying ninja, I am always keeping my ear to the ground to see what is out there in medical science or in alternative health, or what's the newest thing or what's the hottest thing on the market right now. And I find it fascinating that sometimes medical science seems to come full circle and eventually realize that natural healing is the best medicine. And it's almost as if we forget about common sense and we forget about what worked in the past in our mad dash to invent new treatments, new medications, new technology, etc. And that's not a bad thing. That's really good. I mean, we're always looking to improve the quality of our life, and I think that's fantastic that medical science and science in general is always looking for other alternatives. But sometimes we forget that nature does provide its own way of healing, and anytime that we can tap into that is a great way to supplement our health and our well-being. So in my attempt to keep my ear to the ground, I discovered a radical concept in healing that is just so amazing, it'll just blow your mind. Are you ready for it? It's just pretty radical, but it's something that the ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and Persians practiced for years, centuries and centuries ago, because it was something that they were convinced to be the best food and medicine in the world. So here it is. I hope you're sitting down. It is sunlight. Yes, the power of the sun and the healing rays of the sun has been proven to have many incredible benefits of good health. And I'll go into the details a little bit later, but it's really interesting. I became really curious about light and natural light a few months ago when I was starting to experience some really strange sensations and some strange symptoms that almost felt like they were neurological. It felt like something was really grinding on my nervous system. Like you've heard that comment before that, oh, I've got one nerve left and you just got on it. And that's what I felt like. I felt like somebody was just grinding away at my nerves, and I would get really dizzy and lightheaded for no reason. And even my eyes would not be able to focus. And I was really getting worried because this didn't seem like a good thing. And I was even starting to feel really cranky and out of sorts and almost even depressed. And I wondered what in the world was going on. But I did notice that it was starting to affect me most of all when I was in ballet class. I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is there something that's happening in my nervous system, some kind of neurological condition? And then I realized that in one of the dance studios, which is absolutely beautiful, it's a wonderful room, which has windows all along two walls. And the fluorescent lights were always turned on when we walked in there. And one of my friends and I would just turn off the lights and said, I don't think we need these because there is so much natural light coming in through the windows. And I didn't have those symptoms. And I thought that was interesting. And then I realized when I went to the other dance studio, which also had a pretty good source of natural light, but had huge fluorescent lights in the ceiling. And the first person that would walk into the studio in the morning would flick on those lights and they would be on just blasting away the entire time. And it almost like I felt like I could feel that electrical zzz, zzz, zzz going through me, almost like the fluorescent lighting was just sucking the life out of me or just really doing a number on my mind, my brain, and my eyes. And I would even get these strange like floaters across my eyes sometimes during class. So that's when I realized, aha, it must be something with the artificial lighting that's really driving me crazy. And then I thought back to a couple of times when I would be in networking groups that I would come out just feeling like somebody sucked my blood. I was just exhausted. And I figured it was just because I was spending so much time around so many people that I didn't know. And maybe that was just taking a lot of toll on me. But the truth was, I think it was the fluorescent lighting that was making me so crazy. After I got home that day, I went down to my computer in my girl cave to get some work done, and I got crabbier and crabbier, and I just couldn't focus, and I thought, I think I'd need a break. So I went upstairs, went out to my yard, and I have a little chair that I put right in the middle of the yard sometimes so I could just look around and enjoy the trees and the birds and the dogs running around me. And as soon as I sat in the sun and I felt the sun on me, I started to feel better. I was in a much better mood, and I figured I had just needed a break. So I sat out there for about 15 or 20 minutes, and I felt fantastic. I got up, I went back downstairs, I was able to concentrate and able to get some work done, and that really got me thinking. And that's how I started this curiosity and this journey into the power of natural light and what is some of the harmful effects of unnatural lighting, like the fluorescent lights that were making me so crazy. And it is kind of ironic how this happened is that I had picked up a book that I have on neuroplasticity that I absolutely love, and I have referenced it before in episode 16, The Magic of Healing Through Movement. And the title of the book is The Brain's Way of Healing, Remarkable Discoveries and Recoveries from the Frontiers of Neuroplasticity, and the author is Norman Doidge, MD. The last name is spelled Doidge. And as I was flipping through this book, the book just happened to fall open to a chapter on light. And the title of the chapter is actually Rewiring a Brain with Light. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy because who wants to think about rewiring their brain? But the point is that they are actually using light therapy now to help people recover from brain injuries and to actually regenerate neural tissue. But right in the very beginning of the book, or of the chapter, there is a quote from Florence Nightingale and something that she wrote in 1860 in a book called Notes on Nursing, which is the incredible healing power of sunlight. And it specifically says that second only to the need of fresh air is the need of light. Because after being in a closed room, what hurts patients the most is a dark room. And it is not only light, but direct sunlight that they are wanting. And people think that the effect is upon the spirits only, but that's not true. This is by no means, according to Florence Nightingale, that it is no means the case. The sun is not only a painter, but a sculptor, which are really powerful words when you think about it. And it was from that moment on that in hospitals, they would wheel patients out into the sunlight. And even that was the forerunner of solariums, where sunrooms were actually built in quote unquote modern hospitals back then. So patients would be able to get the benefit of natural light and of sunlight. However, then with the advent of the light bulb and all the other wonderful artificial lighting that came with it, it was believed that the artificial lighting had the same healing benefit as natural light, as sunlight. And so all of a sudden the solariums and the thought of taking patients outside to enjoy the sun kind of went by the wayside with modern technology and all the wonderful things that we were learning. Along the way, like I said, we have a tendency to forget what works best and what patients really needed at the time to be able to complete the healing process. And what is it about sunlight that makes it so powerful and such a powerful healer? It is because the rays of sun actually stimulate the production of vitamin D in the body. However, the vitamin D is produced by the rays, the shorter wavelength of ultraviolet light, the UVB rays, rather than the longer wavelengths of the UVA wavelengths. So the fact is that moderate sun exposure, preferably at midday with no sunscreen, can dramatically boost vitamin D levels. And it is important to get out around noon because that is when there's the highest level of UVB light. It is at its peak and has the best balance of UVB over UVA. The UVB-UVA ratio is at its best. So that's something to keep in mind, which is really important because there's been a rash of vitamin D deficiency in the United States, according to the CBC. At least half of our population is vitamin D deficient, and that could be because of a lack of sunlight. And when you think about it, how much time do you really spend outside? And especially at midday, when most of us are indoors, we're working, we're taking care of business, and we're really not even thinking about getting outside and getting our sun. And you add to the fact that we were told that the sun is actually evil. And it can be. It's a very powerful source. It's a powerful source of energy. So we do have to protect ourselves. We don't want to sit outside all day long without sunscreen on, but we do need those penetrating UVB light, to those particles, to get into our body so we can have the production of vitamin D. And even as far back as when Joseph Pilates was born, I know I did a recent episode on the benefits of Pilates. As a child, Joseph Pilates was very sickly. He was plagued with a lot of health issues. He had asthma. He was incredibly underdeveloped. He was frail and sickly, and he suffered from rickets, which was caused by a lack of vitamin D. So once he became very interested in health and fitness at a very young age, by the way, he started working out outside, even in gym trunks. And up until the day he died, when he had a studio in Manhattan, he was always seen walking around with nothing but gym trunks on. And he would go outside during the day and exercise with his trunks, and people used to think that he was just showing off his nice, fit, muscular, buff body. But the truth is, because of his experience as a child with the vitamin D deficiency and his rickets, he knew that it was really important to be able to get outside and to get that healthy dose of sunlight so he could have a high, healthy level of vitamin D and not go back to where he was before as a child. So it made a lasting impression on him. They knew back in those days that the sun was healthy for us. We, of course, took it to the extreme with all of our excessive sunbathing, probably in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, before we realized that everything in moderation really is a good thing. So just to keep that in mind. And I did want to cover a couple of other of the problems with a vitamin D deficiency, but I wanted to start with the positive. So let's start with the good news first, and we'll talk about all of the wonderful healing properties of vitamin D that we get through sunlight, often referred to as heliotherapy, which means natural sunlight. But today it also refers to artificial sources of ultraviolet, visible, or infrared light radiation that is used in different forms of therapy, and that's something that I can get into a little bit later. But first, let's talk about some of the healing properties of the sun, of heliotherapy. Heliotherapy is used to help cure and heal certain skin conditions, including acne, psoriasis, and other skin disorders. And that takes me back to my teenage years. I had terrible skin. My sister and I, one of my sisters, and I had terrible acne, and we went to a dermatologist in our area. So this was probably late 1960s, early 1970s, and one of the things that he used to treat us with was a sun lamp. So they would put something over our eyes to protect our eyes, and they would blast our faces, and I do mean blast them. We were so badly burned that you couldn't even smile for days afterwards, sometimes even weeks, and our skin would turn this incredible red color, and our skin would crack, and it was awful, and it really didn't do that much to heal the acne. But not only then did we have acne, but we looked like we had witnessed a nuclear blast. It was terrible. So since those days, I know that sun lamps and the way that they use them to treat skin disorders has probably come a long way. At least I would hope so, because it was really horrible to go through. So let's give a shout out to modern technology for that. Natural sunlight also promotes muscular stimulation as well as relaxation, and I can attest for that. I know when I sat outside in my yard that day when I was feeling so rotten, it was an immediate sense of relaxation and a sense of well-being. It can also help with seasonal affective disorder for those people who are really affected by prolonged exposure to rotten weather or gloomy weather and not having the ability to see the sun. I know growing up in Western Pennsylvania, that happened to us a lot, where we would have a lot of gloomy days all tied together, one right after another. And I even remember a time when I was a little girl, I was probably about 10 years old. And of course, summer vacation, you looked forward to that the entire school year because I hated school so much. So on the very first day of summer vacation, which we would spend our summers, where there was a community swimming pool just really right off of our property. So we would just run down our hill, our backyard, and we would be on the pool property. So we would spend our entire summers swimming and playing in the water and the swimming pool with our friends. Well, the very first day of summer vacation, it started to rain, and it rained every single day for 31 days in a row. We were going nuts, and so were our parents because they couldn't stand dealing with us either. But it was just horrible, and even the local forecasters would try and make a joke out of it, and they would say, "Oh, parents, you might want to pull out the Encyclopedia Britannica," that's what we used back then, "to show your children a picture of the sun so they don't forget what it looks like." We didn't think it was very funny, and neither did our parents, and we just impatiently waited for the day that the sun would come back out, and it was a happy day for all of us when it did. Here is another benefit of the sun that really surprised me, and that is it can decrease body odor. Who knew? But I will tell you that, it is known to decrease bacteria. So maybe that's what it does, because body odor is caused by the accumulation of bacteria on our skin. So maybe that's how it works, is that the sun just zaps that bacteria and the body odor is gone. I don't know. I just have this mental image of people lying out in the sun with their arms over their head. And as somebody who has had her armpits sunburned before, you really don't want to repeat that. But as they say, the sun really is a powerful disinfectant. And that's something I discovered years ago after, doing ballet for hours at a time. And, my point shoes, my toe shoes would get wet from the sweat from my feet. And after a while, boy, the smell coming from my ballet bag was really, really awful. So I took my shoes and just put them outside in the sun for a couple of hours. And it was amazing because not only did it dry my shoes out, but there was absolutely no smell. So if you do ever have a pair of shoes or sandals that are getting kind of funky, just put them in the sun and it's amazing what it does. So I think that's a really cool way of doing it rather than using some of the other sprays or other foot deodorants that you can use that God knows what's in them that might be kind of toxic to your body. So another benefit of sunlight is that it boosts our immune system. And I'm not exactly sure how it does that, but to me it sounds like a pretty good idea. So getting out in the sun can actually help you prevent infections and illness, which kind of makes sense because that might be why people get sick more often in the winter when we aren't exposed to natural sunlight, especially if you live in an area that has a tendency for a lot of gloom, which is where I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. In Colorado, we do have an awful lot of sunny days, even after it snows, but that comes with another potential hazard because it is really easy to get burned in Colorado because we are at a higher altitude and the sun rays are a lot more powerful. And then once it does snow, if you go out in the sunshine, when there is snow on the ground, the reflection from the snow of the sun from the snow is really, really powerful. So we have to be really careful here not to get too much sun exposure and to take the appropriate precautions, whether it's sunscreen, covering up, not going out when it's really bright. I remember one time when we were hiking and it was just a beautiful day and we were up pretty high. We were well over 10,000 feet and there was a lot of snow on the ground and it was just a gloriously beautiful day. And there were an awful lot of people from out of state who were hiking on that trail. And there were so many people who were hiking just in t-shirts or even camisoles and no hat. And, the little sun protection person inside of me, maybe I was a dermatologist in my previous life, I don't know, but I kept saying, are you wearing sunscreen? And oh no, we're just trying to soak it all up. And, I was handing out tubes of sunscreen to people. Everyone thought I was insane, but I realized that they were going to be awfully sick for a couple of days if they didn't cover up or take care of themselves. So anyway, okay, rant over, let's just move on. So sunlight can also decrease bacteria count by as much as 50% from infections. So if you do do have a skin infection or a wound that is having a hard time healing, that sunlight, exposure to sunlight, healthy sun, can actually help you heal from that wound. The other thing, another benefit, is DNA repair. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I did try and look into that a little bit more deeply, but I don't know if that's related to cancer cells. I just couldn't find anything more specific regarding that. And of course, natural sunlight is used for the treatment of neonatal jaundice. And this was discovered quite accidentally when post-World War II that physicians became better at saving lives of premature infants. So that's when neonatal jaundice became a growing problem. So in Essex, England, a former World War II hospital with a sunlit courtyard, which was facing south, was devoted to taking care of these jaundiced babies. And one of the nurses this is really funny, she was known for her skill in rearing puppies. So they put her in charge of the little preemies. And so she would often just take the most delicate of them and take them outside into the fresh air in the sunlit courtyard. And of course, the rest of the hospital staff was really anxious about that and nervous, thinking that, what was going to happen. These frail little babies, they should be inside in the dark and sterile environment without the threat of the germs of the fresh air and all that stuff. But amazingly, her babies got better, and they recovered from their jaundice far more quickly than the babies who were left inside. Sunlight has also been proven to reduce inflammation throughout the entire body. So think about it. If you do have arthritic joints or you feel really stiff and you end up going outside and just being exposed to the sun for even 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you start to feel better and the joints start to feel a little bit looser and a little bit more mobile. And that is because it is reducing the inflammation in the body, which causes the pain. Typically, it was thought that it was just the heat that was making the body feel better, that it was just helping to get the blood flow, which is part of it, and that is true. But it really is that the sunlight is decreasing the amount of inflammation, and it has been used to treat psoriatic arthritis, which is a very painful condition. So, get out in the sun. It makes you feel better. I know that my grandfather used to love going out and sit in the sun, and especially when, he was getting older. And I wonder now if it was just because he enjoyed being outside so much or because it felt so good to his joints. And my mom and dad both were huge fans of the sun, especially my mother. God, she hated the cold weather. She hated the winter, which is, why she lived in Western Pennsylvania, since we always had such great weather all the time. Getting a little sarcastic there. But anyway, once the sun was out, so was she. It feels good to the body, and it's free, it's easy, it's cheap. And so why not take advantage of this incredible healing power of the sunlight when you can? So just remember to make sure that you're out at midday and make sure that you start with very small increments of exposure, starting with maybe 15 minutes at a time, and make sure that you do not overdo it, because you really want to get the benefits of the short wavelength of the UVB and not the longer wavelength of the UVA, and just to be sensible about it. And, it's good for your health, so why not? And so what are the risks of not getting enough sunlight? It seems that we are living in such an artificial world with artificial lighting and just running around all day. We wake up to an alarm clock. It's still dark outside. We go to work. We're in an office building or wherever it is that we're working all day long. By the time we get home, it's already dark. So wintertime is really tough, I think. But so what are some of the risks of not getting enough sunlight and having a vitamin D deficiency? It can actually increase our risk of cardiovascular disease. And I'm not sure if that has to do with inflammation in the body, because that is really what causes a lot of the cardiovascular disease, the formation of plaques on the inside of our arteries. So I think that that's probably the cause. So it can also increase the risk of early death, but I couldn't find anything specific on this or any specific evidence of what kind of death it could lead to. So I'm kind of scratching my head on that one, and I'm not sure how accurate that really is. So I'm taking that one with a grain of salt. And the decreased vitamin D can actually increase incidence of dementia. So our vitamin D levels are incredibly important for our cognition and our brain function. It can decrease our immune function, especially put us at higher risk for infections such as pneumonia and other respiratory illnesses. That kind of surprised me as a former respiratory therapist. I've seen what pneumonia can do to people, and respiratory problems are very prevalent. Again, I wonder if this is related to, you see it a lot more in the winter than you do during the summer. So just that generalized immune function diminishes with a decrease of your vitamin D. It can also increase the risk of depression, secondary to the loss of function in the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain which regulates mood, and it also harbors the vitamin D receptors in that part of the brain. So that's why if that is impacted by a decreased vitamin D level, then you do have an increased risk of depression because the brain isn't able to regulate our mood quite as well or quite as easily. So another problem of vitamin D deficiency is increased levels of pain and inflammation, primarily in the joints. Well, there's no big surprise, and I already did mention that, is psoriatic arthritis, is the vitamin D deficiency increases the levels of white blood cells in the body, and that is a result of inflammation. So that's something to really pay attention to. And the other thing, and this really surprised me, is that it can increase the risk of prostate cancer. So it's not really necessarily the sunlight itself. It is the vitamin D levels in our body. And even with menopausal women and premenopausal women, they always told us, take your calcium, you need your calcium, prevent osteoporosis, and that everybody was just sucking down those calcium tablets or those yummy little chocolates or candies, and they were quite tasty, and it was a great way to get our calcium, but it wasn't being absorbed by the body because we really needed the vitamin D to help our bones absorb the calcium. So that was a key element that was missing. So there was a lot of work done recently, a lot of studies and research done on vitamin D and vitamin D deficiency. And like I had said earlier, CDC discovered that half of the population does suffer from a vitamin D deficiency. So that's just something really to keep in mind, especially now since you know what the health benefits are of a healthy vitamin D level, getting it through natural light, sunlight, and what the consequences are of a vitamin D deficiency. There's really no reason for that in this day and age to have something like that. So just to really pay attention to the amount of sun that you are getting, healthy sun, making sure that you're doing it in a very sensible way, and using the sun as a tool as part of your health, wellness, fitness, and your whole package. So as I've said before, the more we know, the more we understand our bodies, the more we understand how they work. I think that the healthier and the happier that we can all be, because it gives us power. It puts us in charge of our health. It puts us in charge of our bodies. And the more informed that we are, it also puts us in the driver's seat when we do have to seek medical advice, because we've got facts. We have a lot of information that we can impart to our physicians or to whomever it is that we choose to go to help us. And the more we know, the better off we are. So I always like to keep my ear to the ground and keep learning. And that's another thing that keeps us healthy, is lifelong learning, that sense of curiosity and interest in the world around us, what's happening in science, in medicine, and just in society in general is really an important thing to stay on top of. And I did want to say one more thing about the healing power of the sun, and I'm going to relate this back to my martial arts training, because as we went from our white belt level and started to climb up from white to yellow to orange, the sun was very symbolic to us. And it was as if that as a white belt, we were just as new as the driven snow, and we represented a seed that was being planted in the ground when the snow was still covering us. And then all of a sudden, the sun came out and started to warm the earth, and we started to shoot up. That seed became a sprout. And as we went from our yellow belt to the orange belt, it symbolized that the sun was getting stronger and more powerful. And those rays of sunlight were really symbolizing the growing power and the strength of the student as we went on through our martial arts training. And there is an incredible healing power of martial arts, and it's something that I never would have believed before I went through the process myself. But just that symbol of the sun, the symbol of strength and the symbol of power, I think is just a really wonderful image to keep in mind for all of us, as well as the fact that knowledge is power. And that really is the way way of the FemiNinja is keeping ourselves informed, again, staying interested and curious and engaged, really engaged in what's going on around us at every level and in every single aspect of life. Thank you for listening, and until next time, bye now. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.